I love the announcements. There we go. Tonight we are discussing a wonderful, absolutely delicious fourth lesson of this topic, which is Mashiach, end of days, purpose. And today we're going to be talking about a very Kabbalistic kind of theme, a very Kabbalistic concept. And in that concept, we're going to be discussing what is the not just the purpose of the world, but to understand Mashiach's kind of not just the general gist that it's going to be a happy time, not just the elevation. And we spoke the second discussion. The first discussion we spoke about how physically the world is already getting to that place, and we know it's happening. We can feel it in our bones. We spoke about the aleph that gets inserted, the change that happens, like kind of like flipping a switch, turns the light on, and now we're in a lit up room. The whole room was already there. Just now it's elevated. Last discussion, we spoke about how our mitzvahs are the things that bring us to Mashiach, and they bring you to Mashiach by revealing the true inner meaning of the world. Each mitzvah is as if you were the musician marching up to the piano and playing on the piano and reminding everybody that this is a piano. It is not a table, and it is definitely not a woodpecker's pecking post, right? It's not dinner for a woodpecker. Rather, it is, the piano. And I'm looking for my PDF to send it on so you guys can follow along for parts that you want. Just to make sure I have it. Here we are. And that essentially was kind of the big discussion. We spoke about how Mashiach is something which is going to happen. It's going to be a very natural outcome of what the world is, because the world's going to be ready. It's going to be at a place in which it already feels Mashiach. Whoa, what's going on over there? Okay. Tonight we are going to talk about not just how Mashiach is a great end of times, but we're going to understand really the next level. So we spoke last time about the piano and how it's going to be every item in the world is going to be elevated to the level that we see that it's a piano and its true purpose. And it's not just on this lowest realm, but it's going to be elevated to its highest, most profound experience. Tonight we're going to speak and delve into a little more. And with that, we're going to understand two things of tonight's discussion. Number one, the two things we're going to understand tonight. Number one, we're going to understand how history has, throughout the entirety of history, been pushing us towards this Mashiach end of days. Number one. And number two, we are going to understand, how mosquitoes really have a true meaning. No, we are going to understand, we're going to understand how the depth of what it means that God wanted an elevated world for himself. Let's get to moment. Okay, it's right by the There was once a group of workers that were hammering up a sign on the road, and it said, "The end is near." A little bit later on, they're hammering up another sign, "Turn around before it's too late." A car sees them. He screams as he passes them, "Religious fanatics! What do you think? Anyone cares?" And suddenly they hear, he goes around the bend, and they hear a screech and a splash. So one of the sign hangers turns to his friends and he says, maybe we should change the words. Maybe it shouldn't say "end is near, turn around." Maybe you should just say "bridge is down." Because sometimes the euphemistic terminology of words is not very, very good. And in general, I think we understand this as people, that speaking in euphemisms is nice for poetry, it's nice for music, but it's not very conducive for discussion and for conversation. and for imparting messages. By the way, it seems that one of the big things that we talk about in teaching people how to communicate, especially in corporate or like in more formalized settings, how to speak when there's going to be a system and we have to get things across, is one of the things we try to tell people is to speak. Don't beat around the bush. Don't talk euphemisms. Don't kind of hint to things. Say what you have to say, even if it's uncomfortable, because that way it's clear, it's understood. You made sure you said your part. They understood what they had to hear, and it works well. Tonight, we are going to be talking about Mashiach. The end is near. Not that the bridge is down, but actually the end is near. But it's also the time when we are able to see the end of history as a trajectory, that kind of a story arc that passes through different phases and different acts. And each act is extremely important. Okay. What was our first, what do we say? It's not a quiz, it's a question. Do you remember what we said that God desired to have in this world? That was the purpose of creation. This is in lesson number 2. So the purpose of creation, God desired to have a home. You remember this. A dwelling place down here. A home with us in our world. We spoke about the lowest worlds and the highest worlds, and the highest worlds and the lowest worlds are not, it's not footsteps on a ladder, but it's energy. It's understanding. It's realm of revealed godliness. So there's a key important theme that we're going to focus on. It really is the key to the entire discussion. And that is the usage of the word, and it's a specific usage. It's not just a euphemism. It's a real, specifically chosen word, and that is God chose to have a home. What does the difference between having a home or having a pit stop or having a visit? What does the connotation of home mean to you? You can say, please.
Permanent, forever.
Permanence, forever. Nice.
Home is long term.
Long term, like Jacob said, well said.
A place of comfort or where you can restore yourself.
Comfort, nicely said. Relax.
Continuity of life.
Yes, you're thinking. I'm waiting for your
my wisdom and insight.
your wisdom.
No, I was gonna say the continuity of life is in the home. I mean,
True.
the absence of distraction, hopefully at least.
So far we hit some very, very big ones, and I'll add continuity of life, by the way, is what I would call the next thing, which I want to add is this. So we said, first of all, permanence. That's what Mashiach will be. In other words, the revelation of the godliness down here will be forever. It will not be something that phases back out again. We went out of Egypt and then we went back into exile. We went into Israel and we came out of Israel. We've had phases, and we're going to talk about those phases soon. But this is going to be permanent, to Warren and Jacob's points. Number 1. And number 2, hello. And number 2, we are going to have comfortability, or we would call it letting your hair down, which implies 2 things. Number 1, relaxation, but also it implies your essence. There's a reason why people are not comfortable until they have a place they can call their home. And usually that means the place they're going to be staying either tonight or for the next foreseeable future. I know this in myself whenever I go to a new city. When I go for a visit, when I go to a conference, when I'm going to visit to a hotel for the night, until I put my stuff down in my room and I know where I'm going to be for that night, internally, I'm not comfortable yet. I haven't relaxed. I need to know that there's a place I can go where I can let my hair down. And as you can tell, my hair is keep it very, very up usually, and now I have to let it down. I need a place where I can be, relaxed. And I think that, it's and by the way, it's a very interesting, it's a core human need to have a place that you can call your own. And when you're going around, when you're, even if you go to a conference, you're there, you arrive 9 o'clock in the morning, and they're not going to take your stuff away until you get to put your stuff down. This is by me for sure. You can see that there's an uncomfortability. It feels like we rushed into it, and it's exciting, but there's not that like, here's my stuff. So
when I was in college, I used to say, because I was like, sometimes I was staying at my dad's house, sometimes I was with my sister, sometimes I was at school, and I would always say, home is where my stuff is.
Right. But it's also because that's, where you're going to go.
Right.
Like, where you're going to be tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Follow the stuff. It's always follow the trail. And I think that relaxation, knowing where you're going to be, is very, very important for us as people. And in God's case, what does it mean God knows where his stuff is? What does it mean that God says, I'm going to let my hair down? It means that God is able to say, which what happens when we go home? When we go home, we stop showing off for other people, right? When I was younger, I never really understood why, it's such a big deal to host people. I would see my mother, someone wants to come over late at night or come over for Shabbos dinner. And so I'd be like, my mother, my father would be like, not now. I'd be like, what's the big deal? They'll come in, they'll leave, big deal. But I didn't understand. As a kid, you don't get it. Because as a kid, you're always eternally focused on wherever you are. That's where your whole being is. When you're an adult, you have this new thing, which is you put on the outside face and your outside clothes and your outside persona, and you go outside and you go be with people. And then you come home and you you can even take your physical clothes off a little bit, or you can, let your hair down and scream and run around, make yourself crazy, have a good time, do things you want to do with other people around. That's what home is about. Home is a place where you can not be masked, unmasked. That's what home is about. When God says, I want to be revealed in this world, or I want to dwell in a home, that's the purpose of creation. I'm going to put that text up in a moment on the actual screen. When God says, I want that there should be, I want to be revealed, my purpose of creation is I should have a home, and I should be revealed in the world as a home. God is saying, I want to be able to let my hair down. What does it mean, let my hair down? I want to be able to be in a place where I can be unmasked. So that's the first and most important thing we have to think about when it comes to this purpose of creation. That's number one. Now, when God said, I want to be in this world, and it's in the PDF and in the text on page 139, I'm actually going to open it up on the screen for a moment because I want to highlight 3 things. I already highlighted one. Now that I got your attention, I can highlight the other 2. Let me just pop this open. If I have it, which I do. Here we are. Let me share the screen so we can see it beautifully. Here we are. All right. Sometimes I wish the mosquitoes would learn their prime desire and real will is not to bite me. It would be better than any mosquito spray. Just reveal to them their true will and their true inner essence is to just love me. Okay, here we are. Okay, God's primordial desire, Midrash Tanchuma. What did God want? When the Holy One, blessed be He, created the universe, He desired to have a home in the lowest realm. So far we focused on this aspect, the home. We said it's the place we're going to be there forever. We said it has to be the essence of who we are, or God's essence has to be revealed there. Now let's focus on the next important key phrase here, which is lowest realm. What does it mean, lowest realm? It means that it has to be a place. We spoke about the paradox of God's revelation. It has to be the most distant place, the place that God, when God hid his light, he didn't just hide his light to make it a little dark. If it was a little dark, you could think to yourself, okay, not bad, but where's God's light not going to reach the next place? Not going to reach the next place. So what God decided to do is said, instead of making this phase like, well, make the world here, let's see if Mashiach's gonna come there, then we'll do the next phase and see if he can come there. Instead, God says we're gonna go for broke. We're gonna make the lowest realm there possibly can be. That realm is gonna be a place where not only are they not going to feel my presence constantly, but they're also not even gonna think, they're not even gonna realize that I exist. It will be easy to make the mistake that there is no divine creator, to the point that they're going to start thinking that they came from themselves. Meaning in Kabbalah, it mentions this idea that God built into the world the concept of self-evolvement, self-evolution, self-creation. And God says, put that in there, build it in, make it a complicated world. So that way, when they truly discover me in this lowest realm, that will be the prime paradox, the most beautiful place in which my oneness, my pure and true oneness, my essence, meaning in other words, my house, where I can just relax. I can really shine with all of my purity in the most place that you would never expect it. Okay? So that was number 2. We'll let that sink in. Home, God's essence, relax it, fully revealed. Number 2, lowest realm. And what it doesn't say here, but I'm telling you this is a key component, is that God wants to have this realm not created. Not created. Ooh, how do I get rid of this? No one knows. Okay. Just like that. Not only does God want it to be done through. Am I doing this right? Yes. Okay. No. Yes. Not only does God want it to be done through, in the lower realms, I should say, God wants it to be done through the lower realms. And here I'm highlighting it up on the screen. I'm going to pull it off the screen. Here. God's intention to having a home in the lowest realm is for the lowest realm to become a home for God on its own terms. Emphasis is important. On its own terms. For that reason, the home must be achieved through the efforts of human beings, souls of Israel in corporeal bodies, physical bodies. But only then are the lowest realms themselves reformed into a home for God. By contrast, if the home would be imposed through a transformative revelation from above, the lowest realms would not on their own terms be a home for God. What does this mean? What does this mean? This means it's kind of like there are relationships that are like this. There are relationships in which one person wants to be in the relationship and the other person will do it. I'll do it for you. And it doesn't only happen. It usually happens, or many times. What is the Hebrew word for home? Someone asks. Hebrew word for home is a dirah. It's not a bayit, but it's a dirah, where a place where you live. A bayit is the physical structure, house. A dirah is your home. The final theme, the final thought, which is so critical, is this. Sometimes. Well, I'll give you the stereotypical situation, then you'll understand it. It's more as a joke, but it's also fairly true. At least I find it true in my relationship. Sometimes, you decide you're going to go out for dinner together with a friend, with your spouse, and your wife says, in my case, your wife says, anywhere. Let's go anywhere. You sure anywhere? You have no preferences? Nope, no preferences at all. Anywhere at all? Let's go anywhere you want. Okay, so let's go for pizza. Okay, besides for pizza. Right? And you say, no. I want pizza. Okay, fine. For you, we'll do pizza. Okay, the whole point of going was to have a good time and a date night together. If you're doing it for me, then what's the point? You don't want to come? No. I really want to come. I'm very excited about this. I mean, you seem slightly hesitant. No. I love you. So excited to come out with you. So obviously that is, so to speak, tainted the well. It's ruined the experience. And imagine it wasn't just date night. Imagine it wasn't just this one little, can you do this little favor? Of course. You seem like you're not enjoying it. No. It's fine. It's great. Is that really how it is? In this relationship, in every relationship, in particular in close relationships, the willing participation of both sides is critical to making the relationship work and making the relationship happy. When God says, I want the world to reveal my true essence in the world, the key to making it a true revelation, a true paradox, is that it has to come from the ground up. It must come from us. What does it mean it has to come from us? We have to be the ones to power the experience. We have to be the ones that, as we are going to see through this conversation, phase by phase, the less that God is involved, even in inspiring us, the better. Because as soon as God says, oh, and we'll see, the beginning of the Torah, God says, you want the Torah? We're like, sure. God's like, no, you really want the Torah. We're like, of course we do. But really, it was an overwhelming experience for us. There was no way we were going to say no. We schlepped us out of Egypt, dragged us to this mountain, put on a whole fireworks and show, and then you propose. What are you going to say? No? It's embarrassing not to say yes. Also, they felt the love. God truly poured upon the Jewish people an experience that no other nation got. And then he says, you want to be the custodians of my Torah? Are you going to take the Torah and carry it to the world? What are they going to say? No? Of course they're going to say yes. But in and of itself, while that was wonderful and beautiful, it left a small taste, a small kind of, what if God came to them on a Tuesday afternoon out of the blue? I was like, hey, you want the Torah? Take it. Would the answer still have been, yes, of course, this is your gift to us. Absolutely, we're going to take it. Or would the answer be, you got to propose a little better? Or the answer could have been, I don't know, I'm not really feeling it right now. I'm going to go back to eating some quail. Get back to it a little later. And that was a consistent kind of question almost in the background until the story of Purim came. And I'm kind of preempting the story of what we're going to talk about tonight further, but it helps understand what's happening. Purim changed that narrative. Purim was the first time the Jewish people had a situation in which they were presented with a challenge, an anti-Semitic challenge, right? Anti-Semitism for the first time. Up until that point, they were under God in the desert. They go into Israel. They fight a couple wars. Life is good. Life is great. Nothing happens. And then, now they're in exile in Egypt. In Babylon. And in Babylon, they're surrounded by this nation. Actually, it was Persia by that time. And they're waiting, and they're threatened. They're told, if you give up your Judaism, you'll be able to survive. Otherwise, we're killing you for being Jewish. And they all said, sure, kill us. We're more than. At that point, there was a clarity attained by the community that we're in this not just when it's good. They say, and I don't know if this is true, but they say that your marriage is better after the first fight. I think that with friends, it's also true.
What?
Your marriage is better after the first fight. Not after the 10th fight, but after the first fight for sure, right? And they say the reason is because...
Do you hear this?
The reason is because on the first round, up until that point, there's always this kind of feeling in the background, what happens when we fight? Is that the end of everything? And then you have the first fight, and turns out that Baruch Hashem, you have ways, conflict resolution. I think all friendships are like that also. All friendships, all work relationships are built very similarly in that up until that first friction, you're like, okay, it's good. When does it explode? Then you have the friction. At that point, you're like, mazel tov. We made it through. We're still friends. I didn't understand what you wanted. We have opportunity to be very upset at each other, and thank God we're not. So at that point, you realize that the relationship is two-sided. In other words, maybe it's two-sided. It means both of you are interested. Not just the one with the power, not just the one that was kind of pushing the relationship along. How does this translate back to what we're talking about? When God says, I want to create the world, and I want this paradox, I want revelation in the lowest realms, God's saying, I don't just want revelation in the lowest realms. I want the lowest realms to want it. I want it to come from them. If it doesn't come from them, it's not going to be truly there. It's not going to own it. You see in a teacher and a student. Yeah, a teacher is teaching, the student is studying. The entire time the teacher is explaining, getting deeper and more delving into it, and it's great. But until the student steps up, and until the student says, I'm going to work on this myself, I'm going to try to understand what you're telling me, until that point, the student will never be able to understand fully on their own power what the teacher is teaching. And of course, if the student can't understand, how will the student eventually become their own teacher? So every relationship, you have to have both sides. And in fact, as parents of children, or as teachers of students, we realize this and we say to ourselves, how can I make sure, how can I inspire part of this relationship in such a way I can step away for a moment to allow my child, my student, to step forward into the gap. I think employers have the same question when it comes to employees. Managers have the same question when it comes to their workers. There are times when you feel like, I just want to step in there and do it for them. But of course, if you do that, then you're handicapping them. Instead, you'd rather step back for a moment and say, figure it out on your own. I will go hide myself behind the cloud, and you'll see if you can survive when there's no sunshine. Okay, so I'm gonna just do a visual screen share, because again, these are three very important concepts. I haven't yet figured out a way to get the slideshow to pop up properly. Okay, these are the three things that we need to look for throughout history. Home, in which you have, this is what God desires. It's the most darkest place. It is also the most true, pure essence of God. And last but not least, it is created by us. We are the ones who do this project, not the other way around. Okay, just wanted to put that visual up there. So now, there are four episodes in history that we're going to speak through. And these 4 episodes allow us to show us not only was humanity going through 4 transformative moments in history, but even more than that, humanity was actually stepping forward through these 3 phases until we finally reach this point, which, what's the purpose of me explaining all of this in one shot, in a nutshell? Right, you're like, what's the point, Rabbi? What's going on over here? Very important. 2 key points, and they are, number 1, Mashiach is the culmination of the entirety of history. It's not just an ending that happens to be the last chapter of the book, right? You read some books, you watch some TV shows, and the last episode or the last chapter is like, okay, like it ended, but like, was that really the last one? It could have been any of them. Any of them could have been the last one. Why is this one the last one? Because it came chronologically last? That's not satisfying. So Mashiach is the end of history, not because it comes at the end, right? But because Mashiach actually, they always ask, why, what, when you're looking for something, what you find, you always find what you're looking for, always in the last place you look. You ever notice that? Why? Because once you find it, you stop looking, obviously. So it's going to be the last, no matter where you look, it's going to be the last place you look. So Mashiach is coming at the end, not only because it happens to be the final act of history, but because Mashiach actually is the culmination. It is the final episode of the season that you're like, aha! Now that wraps the season well. It's the final episode of the TV show. You have a 10-year run of season after season after season after season, and the last episode references all episodes, all 70, 80 episodes, and it puts it all together in one, and you're like, mwah, perfect. That's what Mashiach is. Mashiach is the finale of creation. And of course, because Mashiach is the finale of creation, it is the culmination of creation. It is every moment was working towards that point. Every moment is striving towards that point. It is not just that Mashiach is going to be the best time on history. Not only do we fulfill, it is fulfilling the purpose of the world in the sense that the world's going to be the best place to be. Not only is it, okay, God's essence is going to be revealed, so mazel tov, how wonderful. Not only do we do that through our mitzvahs, tikkun olam, and we make the world a holier place, and we piano every piano, and we even take tables and turn the tables into pianos, We even take woodpeckers and attach them to tables to turn those into pianos. We're making everything holy. But even more than that, we find that every single moment in time, every single episode, every single major transformative step in human kind of direction, every single step was taking us one step closer and one step deeper into Mashiach, from a philosophical and Kabbalistic perspective. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to cover this in 4 acts, 4 major episodes, and each of them is an episode and a counter episode, 4 kind of almost binary episodes or dual episodes, and through that we're going to uncover this beautiful, beautiful concept. You're thirsty? Sounds good. Okay, but I'm going to pause for a minute for some questions because I've been speaking for quite a long time and I want to give a moment for some questions. I've been so clear, there's no questions at all. Any questions? Yes, no? No. Good, okay. I'm happy to be very, very clear. Okay, so the 4 episodes are going to be, 1 second, how do I get out of this? Let's do this again. Let's share the screen. I'm gonna do this as a, there we go. Kinahar. Okay, the 4 episodes are going to be the episodes of the Garden of Eden, creation of God placing the humanity in the Garden of Eden, which is bound up with and tied to the story of the tree of knowledge, the first sin. Act 2 is Abraham's monotheistic revolution, but then, there's a dip down, Egyptian slavery, followed by Exodus, Mount Sinai, and of course, the crash landing of the golden calf. And last episode, which is the one we're currently in the middle of, section 2 of Act 4, which is the Holy Temple and the exile that we are currently in. Okay, so we're going to go through each of these 4 episodes, and in the course of going through them, we are going to uncover how we really moved forward. Don't stay with me because I'm teaching you a class. So you can go lay down in your bed. Oh, no. Chana can take you. No. So we're going to go through this. Okay. Okay, let me stop this. Let's talk for a moment. When God created the universe and put Adam and Eve into the Garden of Eden, that was the most beautiful place that you could have been, both from a physical and a spiritual perspective. It was the best. They had all the fruits. They had everything they could possibly want. They had the animals. It was a great place. Now, was the garden the place that we wanted, that God would have said, this is the lowest realm, or this is the place that I want to reveal my essence to be done by Adam and Eve? Would that have fulfilled the requirements that we mentioned earlier? I'll tell you a little secret. 2 things tell you that it's not the case. Number 1, the fact that we still had history after that. So anytime I ask you if we fulfilled the purpose that God wanted for creation in that episode, the answer is going to have to be, at least for now, no. How do we know? Because we're still here. We're still fighting our way along. So obviously we haven't reached the climax of the roller coaster yet. The other way we know, or the way that we can understand that, is if we think to ourselves, what was the feeling in the Garden of Eden? Did it feel like paradise, or did it feel like a messy, dirty world that we have now? It felt like a paradise up until the eating from the tree of knowledge. In the moment that Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, the moment that they sinned, they changed something. And really, it pulled the world down. If those of you who had joined our Secrets of the Bible discussion, which we did. I want to say was it this year? I don't know. Everything blends. I think it was last spring. Maybe it was. No, maybe it was fall. I don't remember. My brain is keep time is under the effect of special relativity. As relative
I think it was last fall.
It was last fall. Okay, thank you, Jason. Someone has an outside observer is able to keep witnessing where things are. Okay. In the course of eating from the tree of knowledge, they did the first sin. What happened with the first sin? And it's not the first sin in the Christian way of thinking of it, but in that moment of the first sin, they brought a mixing of good and evil that hadn't existed until that moment to be. Because they were good people, and they listened to the evil that was outside of them, the snake, and by eating from that apple, they brought evil internally. And in that moment, they brought the world down to the lowest level it could possibly be. Okay? They brought the world down, bam, into a world that is now full, mixed good and evil. Not only was there more evil than good, but it was also thoroughly mixed. And I think to myself, by the way, that the reason why Adam and Eve had to do the sin, and obviously it wasn't like God planned that they should do the sin, but God put it in a very, very risky proposition that they would probably do the sin. He sent a very persuasive snake with a very good-looking apple. It wasn't an apple, by the way. It was either grapes, it was an etrog, it was, there's a lot of different traditions what it was. Not one of the Jewish traditions has an apple. I think Michelangelo or someone like that painted it as an apple, and the Christians were like, apple, of course it's an apple. And all the Jewish sources are like, etrog, grapes, maybe wheat, maybe a date. Lots of options. But whatever it was, as soon as we ate that, we brought the world down into this kind of lower space. And I think the reason why God set up the possibility for it to happen in this way is because God wanted, if God would have done the mixing of himself, it may not have been reversible by humanity. Right? If we do the mixing of good and evil, we can undo it. If God did it, I don't know if it would have been so easy for us. I don't even know if it would have been possible for us to rip them apart, to rip apart the evil and the good. So God creates a world where everything is kind of, the flour and the water is there ready to turn into a dough. But God says, I want the people to be the ones to tip the two buckets into each other. And then they'll be able to undo it on their own, to undo it themselves. So in the Garden of Eden, was it the lowest world they possibly could have? No, it was not. They had to have the sin from the tree of knowledge. Additionally, as we'll understand in a few minutes, but it wasn't yet the essence of God wasn't yet revealed in the world. What does that mean? While God was revealed in the Garden of Eden, it was like God on a business trip. On a business trip. All fancy, a little makeup, dressed in a suit, dolled up a little bit, but not at all in a relaxed fashion. So, if you want to sit, you can sit next to me. You can't go on screen though. Okay? Thank you. And he's like, he wants to learn. What are you going to do? And the God in the Garden of Eden was not yet his essence. We're going to see in a minute when the essence does show up. But it wasn't yet God. It was God on a business trip, so to speak, meaning God the way that God relates to projects. An example of this would be, if I were to ask you, so what do you do for a living? And you tell me what your main project is, or what your main kind of thing is, right? And then I say, you know what? I want to get to know you better. Can I meet you at your place of work, your workplace? I want to become your friend. Let's meet at your workplace. Your reaction to me is going to be puzzled. Why is it going to be puzzled? Not only because nowadays we all work from home, but really the reason you're going to be puzzled is because you're going to say to me, you want to get to know me better It's not by getting to know me at work that you're going to get to know me better. You're going to get to know me better because you meet me in my house. You meet me when we go out for coffee. You meet me in a different setting, a setting where I'm human. You meet me at work, I'm in a persona. You meet me, out there in the world, I have a role. I'm doing this event. I'm training these people. I'm teaching this thing. I'm coming, I'm going, I'm putting projects together. I have things that I'm doing, things that this is not me as a person. You want to meet me, and by the way, that's why also at work it's very inappropriate to say, I would like to meet you at home. The reverse of that. This is a business relationship. You're not going to come to my house. No. Unless we become close friends. In that case, you can come, we can visit each other. But there's a very clear split between business and pleasure, a split between what I do for work and who I am as a person. When it comes to God's relationship with the world, initially God creates the world as a project. Yes, there's a long-term goal here that God's going to become close friends. So, in fact, so close, it's going to be God's house, personal living spaces, bedroom. But in the beginning, when God first creates the world, God is very formal with Adam and Eve. They sin, God comes into the thing. Where are you? What'd you do? I don't see you. I was like, you don't see me. God's like, I'm talking to you. Don't talk back. Very formal. In the Garden of Eden, it wasn't God's essence. Not yet. And of course, if we were to stay in the Garden of Eden, would that have been a project that was the Mashiach coming? Would that have been the world bringing Mashiach? It wouldn't have been the world bringing Mashiach, simply because the world wasn't yet a place that needed Mashiach. It didn't feel like it needed Mashiach. It wouldn't have worked too hard. So Mashiach could never have come in the Garden of Eden. It wouldn't have ticked off the 3 boxes that we need, which again are God's essence, God's full revealed essence. It needs to be the lowest world possible, and it needs to be done by the lowest world. It doesn't hit all 3. Okay. Paradise lost. They do the sin, they get kicked out. When they get kicked out, what does God tell Adam? You're going to go out there, you're going to work the ground. You're going to go work the land. You're going to work the land. We're going to go and move into the physical space, make it holy. And so really it was a step forward. And if we can see, if I can, maybe I can do this way. There we go. Okay. Here we are. The Garden of Eden, was it the lowest realm? The answer is it was not until after the sin. Was God's essence revealed in the Garden of Eden? God's essence was not revealed. It was his business persona, so to speak. And in fact, of course, it wouldn't be done built by us. In fact, by the way, for those of you who are very attentive to the idea of the name of God, you will notice that the name that is used for creation of the world is not God's primary name. It is always the name of God Elohim, which if you dabble in Kabbalistic thought, you'll remember that Elohim is a lower kind of manifestation of God's power. The Tetragrammaton, the big 4-letter name, that's the big one. That is not used during the story of creation. It is mentioned when it comes to Shabbos, only Shabbos. That is because on Shabbos, God planted the seed to be able to connect on this higher level, which again, didn't yet manifest until much later. That's a Kabbalistic clue. So if you read the Torah, you can actually see how it's God's business persona and not God's Kishka persona, as we would say. Okay. What's the next big episode? Who comes next? Adam. Sorry, not Adam. Adam just sinned. Who comes next? Abraham. What does Abraham do? So Abraham does something very, very cool. Abraham discovers God. When Abraham discovers God, it's a very long text that you can actually find in the text in the PDF on page 155. Maimonides gives a full rundown of how Abraham found God. Abraham, in the Midrash tells us that Abraham was in a cave and he was laying there as a child, and he looks up and he sees the sun and he's like, wow, we should all worship the sun. And then he says, actually, you know what? Let's not worship the sun, because the sun goes down at night. It gets pushed away by the moon. So the moon's the big power. Then he waits and he sees the moon comes up and gets pushed away, and the sun comes back. He's like, okay, it's not the sun, not the moon. What's left? Must be clouds. So the clouds can cover the sun. They have more power than the sun. Well, then comes the wind, and the wind blows away the clouds. He's like, okay, maybe we should worship the god of the wind. And as he slowly moves through this deduction, it takes him years to get through this, he realizes God is non-visible, an invisible God. A God that is the power that makes everything happen, but yet does not reveal himself in a physical manifestation anywhere. Once Abraham realizes, he begins to think deeply and comes to the conclusion that it is a monotheistic force, a singular force that creates everything. Once he realizes that, he begins to go around and begins to talk to everybody. He begins to teach the peoples about this God. Later on, he discovers that God hadn't been fully forgotten. There were people who were around who still remembered the good old God. Namely, by the way, Noah. Abraham met Noah. I don't know if you know this. No, Abraham was 58 years old when Noah passed away. So Mr. Noah from the flood, who saves humanity in the whole story, Abraham chilled with him, had a couple beers. I don't know if they had weed then, but I'm sure they would have. And they had a good time. Noah and Abraham spoke. But this is after Abraham came to the conclusion himself. He discovers God and he goes and finds the people who remember this old God. And eventually, years later, he actually speaks to God. And then that's when God promises him the land of Israel. That's when God does a covenant that his grant and his children are going to go into exile. So there's a God. Now, did Abraham, through his work teaching the masses about God and who God is, did that fulfill what we need to bring Mashiach? So first of all, the answer is no, because history continues, right? That was the first clue. But also, while it was done, so to speak, by us down here, right? At the same time, there it is. While it was done by us down here, and while at the same time it was done in the lowest realm possible, evil and good had finally been mixed together in a proper dough of tragedy. However, it wasn't God's essential essence. And by the way, in Yiddish, I'll give you a little Yiddish lesson tonight. There are two terms for God. Okay? Two terms. One term is Bashefer. Bashefer is a very common way of referring to God. Bashefer means the creator, the one who creates us. And there's another term for God, which is Oiberster. Oiberster means the one above, the Almighty. Which in fact is interesting that both in Hebrew and in English, Oiberster, it's spelled Eberster, A-I, Eberster. So I just say Oiberster because I have a little bit of a Russian lilt to it. But it's Eberster with an A-I. And the term in English is the Bashefer is a B, or even if English, it's a C, creator. Because A comes before B, it's higher than B. A comes before C, it's higher than C. God, as the Almighty, is greater than God as the creator. Creator is business person. Almighty is home person. In Hebrew and Yiddish, Eberster is the Aleph. Bashefer is with a Bet. Aleph comes before Bet. Because Aleph is a higher realm, it's God's essence. Bashefer is be. What was Abraham able to reveal? What did Abraham discover? What did Abraham think about? What did he relate to? He discovered God as the creator. So he was able to bring God into the world, reintroduce God into the world, but yet only as a business persona. He wasn't yet able to reach God as the energetic, divine, above world being. Obviously, for us, it's really easy to be the Monday morning quarterbackers, in which we're sitting here, we're looking back and saying, oh, well, how did Abraham not figure out who God is? Of course, Abraham should have figured out that God is everything. But that's not the point. The point is that Abraham couldn't tap into an energy that God didn't release into the world. And because they weren't able to understand and to emphasize God as Oibishter, Almighty, because they weren't able to get into that space, that could never be revealed. And because it wasn't able to be revealed, Mashiach wasn't able to come yet. Because we need to see Hashem, God, as his own not only as his backyard, but as God as he is in his, so to speak, metaphorical bedroom. Relaxed, fully revealed. No persona, no walls up. So they had to go through a transformative experience to prepare them for the next thing. What was that transformative experience? Abraham, and God tells Abraham, your grandchildren are going to go into Egypt. When they go into Egypt, they're going to be crushed. And they're going to be remade. Almost like when you take pottery. I don't know if you've ever done pottery on a pottery wheel? You should try it, JC. It looks like you'd really enjoy it. Pottery on a pottery wheel is fun, but the best part is the part you don't really get to see. Is when you take a piece of basically clay, not basically, it is clay, it's soft, it's holding its form, but like barely, and you put that into the oven. You blast it with heat. And it does a restructuring of the molecular insides, and it comes out pottery. It's hard, it's firm, if there's a glaze, it's shiny, it's a very different piece. Totally different. God took the Jews and takes the nation, not even yet the Jewish people, Abraham's grandchildren, but he promised them, I'm going to put you into the Egypt, and I'll take you out. This is what we mentioned by the Haggadah. We say, God told us he's going to put us into Egypt for 400 years. Thankfully, God learned how to count, not from the count of Sesame Street, so God only counted 210 years, and then took us out of retro-calculating. It's like, okay, you know what? 400 years is a really long time. How about we count it from the time that Isaac was born? Because technically, we could say that you guys was already Abraham's kids, so it counts. Or maybe, whatever. So Abraham instead, God takes them out after 210 years. God takes them out, but up until that point, God is saying, with the exile into Egypt, God is remaking the Jewish people, clearing the way for the next phase. Okay, let's come back to our wonderful. Aha. Goodness gracious. This is what we need to do in Egypt. Change what was into what can be. Mazel tov. And why was it so important? Because while it was the lowest realm, and while it was built by us, it was not God's essence. God had to reveal his essence. He had to do it for us. And to do that, God gave us, where are we? God took us into Egypt. Let's see what happens. How does God introduce himself by the giving of the Torah? What's the first of the 10 commandments? I am God, your God, who? Tim, you're on mute. What?
Brought you out of the land of Egypt.
Brought you out of Egypt. Very good. Why does it not say, I am God, your God, who created heaven and earth? Would have made sense.
Limited. Yeah.
right? So there's an interesting, there's two reasons, or there's more than two reasons. One reason that I love that I'm going to have to insert here anecdotally is that when you talk to somebody, it's always good to remind them how you have a connection. God didn't come to the people and be like, well, remember heaven and earth, I created all this? Even though it's a much bigger project, God wanted to tell them about, what did I do for you? What's our relationship, our personal relationship? And that's in general a good rule in all relationships. If you want to keep what's going on between you going, remind each other about what you've done for each other. The personal side of the relationship, not the grandiose, the big picture. No. Do a favor, something small. God took you out of Egypt. How are you? Come, we'll talk about this Torah that I have for you. It's really good. Trust me. So that's an anecdotal piece. But the other piece that I want to focus for this purpose here is that God is emphasizing not the power of creation, not the bet, not creator. God is emphasizing Almighty. What is the Almighty? Almighty. What is Almighty? I can do anything. In fact, if you remember, about 7 weeks ago, I took you out of Egypt, a land which was more hermetically sealed than Soviet Russia. I took you out of Egypt after having pummeled them with plagues for a year, 10 massive plagues. And then, if you remember, I took you through the sea. The sea, which was not a natural occurrence at all. It was completely supernatural. How could I do all of this? Because while I created the universe, guess who makes the rules here? That's right. Uncle God, I make the rules here. I can do what I want. And I did do what I want. You saw it. Aha. I saw it. You saw me. You understand that there is something that I have a power that transcends the universe as you know it. I transcend your physics. I transcend your quantum physics. I transcend the physics that transcend your physics. All the rules that you think exist and don't exist, I actually am greater and bigger than all of those rules. That's who I am. Hello. These are the 10 commandments that I'm going to tell you. Because I'm coming to you not in my business persona anymore. I am God in my bathrobe. I am God in my energy. Full power. And that is God at Mount Sinai. Full essence, fully relaxed. So let me ask you a question. Have we hit all 3 boxes yet? Is it the lowest world? Yes, it is. So we've got that. Is it God's essence? We just said it's God in his full power. The challenge is that, as I mentioned to you, I dropped the hint before. Did the Jews really have a choice when they were to accepting the Torah? Did they really have a choice? Like I said, it was fireworks. It was fireworks on a yacht in the middle of the Hudson with a 20-piece band, and then God dropped his knee and held out a ring. What are you gonna say? No?
I guess we could have said no, but we wouldn't be here right now, probably. So, you know.
So I really wonder if we could have even said no. You know what I'm saying? Emotionally, from a emotional perspective, right? Could we have said no? Were we ready for it? We were ready for it. Did it come because of us? Not really. To a point, yes, we agreed. That's a good news. It would have been much wilder if God swept us under the marriage canopy and said, Mazel tov, we're married. You're like, what? I haven't even had breakfast yet. So that didn't happen, which is good. But God proposes and says, do you want to marry me? And we're like, And God's like, of course you do. And we're like, yes, of course, absolutely. We would love to get married, for sure. And then we do. But did it really come from us? And the answer is, we didn't start it. And if we didn't start it, it didn't really come from us. Okay, complicated. So we hit 2 out of the 3 boxes. But while we had by Abraham's times, Abraham was the one who had to find God and discover God and schlep God out of hiding. In this case, it was all fireworks and beautiful, and it didn't have a lasting impact in that godly experience. How do we know it didn't have a lasting impact? Because the Mount Sinai itself actually never became fully holy. What does it mean it never became fully holy? The next morning, they were allowed to go on Mount Sinai. On the day of the giving of the Torah, if they would have gone on Mount Sinai, any person would have walked on Mount Sinai would have died from the intense power and energy that it had. But the next morning, you can walk on it, no big deal. Why? Because the holiness was temporary. It was God forcing the holiness. It was from above. And because it was from above, it wasn't grounded in the dirt. There was no battery effect. It didn't stay. The molecules didn't remain supercharged holy. But rather, they let go of the energy as soon as God stopped pushing it. That's also why the golden calf happened. Because the energy was too powerful. The people, the children of Israel, at the time of the golden calf, the revelation was too much, and when the revelation ended, they wanted a way to find somehow something that would be good for them, that would work for them, and Moses disappears, and they go into this freak. They have this basically an anxiety attack almost, where they're like, the panic. Where's Moses? Who's going to take us? Who's going to give us? We spoke to God. God was in his bathroom, so to speak. It's a very, very powerful energy. Now, is that it? We're never going to have it again? Moses is gone. Where's Moses? And in that moment, the people fall. What does it mean they fall? They look for a golden calf. They look for a golden calf to be able to give them that reassurance. And with the golden calf, they were almost on the right track. What do you mean they were almost on the right track? They were almost in the right direction. They almost had the moment where God was going to say, this is how you bring a mitzvah into the world. It has to be physical, you're right, but not with a golden calf. It has to be a mitzvah. And so once they repented from the golden calf, God gave them the mitzvah of the tabernacle, the mitzvah of the temple. And with the temple, it began the final phase. The final phase of creation began with the temple. It started in the temple and it continues now through exile. What is that phase? God's essence is revealed because God already started that process by the giving of the Torah. And every time we do a mitzvah, we're able to tap into God's core being. God's core isness, oneness. It is the lowest world thanks to the first sin of the tree of knowledge. We've aced that testing. Is it being done because of our work? Well, in the temple, it was grounded. The temple was grounded work. We had to work and we didn't have revelation. But with the exile from the temple, we went into our final test mode. And when I say test mode, it don't mean in the sense that God is testing us. People ask me, why did God create us in this world? Is it because God wants to test us? So that way he should he or should he not give us the world to come? Right? If that's the framework, then why it seems almost pointless. Like it's nice, but is that why God's going to create a whole elaborate world just to see if we're good enough to go into heaven? It's like a video game. If you beat all the bosses and you get to have big heaven, You only get half the bosses, you get half small heaven. And I'm specifically saying it in a silly way, because I do think it's a silly concept to say that's the whole purpose of why God creates a complicated world. God creates this world, not that we should beat the world and then go off to some heaven to live gloriously, but God created us, again, to be the paradox. And of course, God wants this paradox to be the most complicated paradox. And so God wants it to be in the most challenging times. And so God specifically puts us into exile, away from the temple, away from Israel, away from the revelation of godliness that we had in the temple, away from the miracles that happened in Israel. And instead, God says, now find me. Now find me. And that is the challenge of our paradox. In a certain sense, it's like when you think of a parent and a child. When a child is first born, where's the parent? At their side the entire time. Feeding them, holding them, changing them, carrying them, picking them up, putting them down. When I carry my daughter Shayna around, I think to myself, I am currently carrying a less than 2-foot version of a human that in a couple of years I'm going to look at, I'm going to say, how did I carry this person around? And it's really, really very clear when you look at a child who is a person who is 20 years old, you think to yourself, that person 20 years ago was being schlepped around by their mother, literally from place to place. They didn't go anywhere without their mother or father. And yet, over time, as time progresses, the child begins to slowly get distance from the parents. First, the kid doesn't need their help to eat everything. They can eat themselves. And then they can drink themselves. They can walk. Then they can go to the bathroom on their own. Then they don't need help getting dressed. And the order is imprecise. It might be a little bit different for every child. And then eventually they get older. And next thing you know, they're not telling you what they're doing in school and who their friends are. And next thing you're finding out, they're older. And then they hit the teenage years, the wonderful teenage years, where they discover that they knew more than their parents all along. In fact, their parents were so dumb. How did they even get this far in life? It's incredible. Very lucky people that they made it this far. So dumb. And then, the joke goes that kid says, I was 18, I thought my dad was the dumbest person in the world. When I was 21, I was shocked how much he had learned in 3 years. Later on, you move forward, and suddenly they're like, hey, maybe my parent isn't such an idiot. Maybe they're nice. And there's a connection that is built as an adult. When we get to know our parents as adults, suddenly there's a different relationship. It's a very different relationship than we were as kids.
Oh, yeah.
But it's a relationship that's now built on mutual respect, on understanding each other, on a more intellectual connection that parallels the connection that we have of just being a child to a parent. There's a certain raw pureness in a young child, in a relationship with a parent, but you don't want it to stay that way for the rest of their life. You want them to grow further. Our relationship with God kind of went through the same path. God takes the Jews out of Egypt. Well, in the Garden of Eden, it was the same thing, but let's skip to the Jews out of Egypt. It's easier. The Jews come out of Egypt, and God gives them food, the manna. God gives them water, the well of Miriam. God gives them shelter. God literally transports them from place to place, like a baby. Miracles happen every hour on the hour. They go into the land of Israel. Now the miracles slow down a bit, a little less. And as the years tick forward, slowly but surely God recedes into the background. The miracles become more and more hidden. Every once in a while, there's an emergency, parent comes swooping in to help save the situation. So yes, Purim, boom, God's there. Hanukkah, boom, God's there. And throughout history, here and there, God shows up in a big way for the people. But generally speaking, God's plan is to stay in the background. As a parent, stays in the background of an older child. In fact, sometimes, the parent says, I want to help you. And the kid's like, leave me alone. I'm an adult. I do it myself. My dear, you're 17 years old. You're not anywhere near anything. Nope, I can do it myself. Okay? Then after many years of even with a little bit of rebellion mixed in, then the child begins to come back and say, hey, can we talk? I want to hang out and chat about stuff. I don't even know what. I want to be friends. And that, I think, is the last, maybe 200 years kind of we as humanity went through that. We went through a period of rebellion when everyone's like, no, God's fake. It's not real. Science, culture, music. Everything else is, this religion thing is so bunk, so old-fashioned, so childish. How do you believe in a God that carries you around and feeds you? It's so silly. Then, in the last, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years, we say to ourselves, where is God? Let's talk to God. Seems like a cool dude. Might have some real conversation as an adult. Also, we remember the deep essential connection we have as parent to child, God to creation. But we're also like, let's talk. Let's see what the spirituality thing is. And that's why I think there's a resurgence today of not just Judaism and religion, but I think spirituality in general. People are like, hey, what's the spiritual business? Let's talk Torah. Let's talk Judaism. And that is where Mashiach is. That's where we're going with Mashiach. That's the purpose of creation. What is the purpose of creation? God wants us to experience that we should be the ones to bring Mashiach in our world, on our terms, from our perspective. The lowest of the low. We're in the lowest world with God's essence available to us. And all we have to do is do our mitzvahs. And then we are able to bring history, not just an ending, but to the grand finale, the best final episode that doesn't just run 3 extra hours long because it has to tie up all the loose ends, but it is the longest episode because it is the best episode. We never wanted to. And that, my friends, is what we're working towards. And that is the culmination of history. And it is also the culmination of this class. It is 9 o'clock. I will stay around. I'm going to pause the recording. Stop